Instructional video on how our adapter plate works for the Cd009 Nissan 6-speed. Hopefully anyone who's looking at doing that particular conversion finds that helpful.
You ready? Let's go! Yeah! For those of you that want to know what we're all about, it's like this, y'all. This is 10% luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the name. Fort Minor.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be on the Cd009 to rotary adapter, and basically what comes in the kit and a step-by-step on how you can fit it to your own gearbox with your FC, FD or RX8 bell housing if you choose to. So we start with a brand new Cd009. Now I say Cd009, that's commonly what they're known as. If you buy a new one, it's probably going to be a Cd008, which is a triple synchro from 1 through to 4 and a double synchro on 5 and 6. These are the later model box, not to be confused with the JK40 box, which is out of the 370Z. This is out of the 350Z. So this is the latest iteration of the 350Z Z33 6-speed. We have a very simple adapter plate which bolts to the transmission once you cut the bell housing off, and it is all set up so that your Mazda bell housing locates on that register, and it is all concentric, so you don't have any alignment issues at all. So once you open the box up, this is what you'll expect to see. They don't come with a shifter, in case anybody was wondering. They do come with the shifter housing. It's just missing the stick, the ball, spring, the reverse lockout plate. Cd008. Alright, so this particular gearbox will be going into an RX4 and getting an S1 sequential shifter. So even though this is new, no longer required, the S1 sequential bolts up into here, so a little bit of setting up in that department. The bell housing will be cut off. We've explained before this rib here, but we'll go through it all again. There's a few lugs here to be cut off, a little bit of grinding here just to get some clearance on the top side of the tunnel. But we'll get the grinder out and we'll cut this bell housing off. Okay, so now that it's unpacked, we're going to cut the bell housing off. Now we want to cut just in front of this line here. That will give us, maybe you can see a casting mark there. That's roughly that line. We need to be just below the surface that this plate here bolts to. If we're forward of it, when the adapter plate goes on, it won't bottom out on the bearing, and the adapter plate does act as a retainer when it replaces this plate here. It acts as a retainer to hold the main shaft bearing. So we'll get cutting. Okay, so now that the bell housing's off, you'll see exactly what I mean about this mounting face. So where that gasket is right there, that's how far back the case needs to be taken. Now yes, you could have cut on the other side of this rib here, and if you've done a couple, that's where you'll go to, but this is for demonstration purposes. For those that haven't done one previously, bought one of our kits, whether you've got a new trans or a second-hand trans, cut in front of that line. You'll be able to eyeball that much better, and then rather than cutting too far back and potentially wrecking the gearbox, it's always safer to cut this side. You can cut off, but you can't cut on. So now I'll just mark that where I need to be, and a rough indication is where these casting webs are here. That is pretty much just below the surface. So we want to be slightly proud of those. Okay, so once we've trimmed the case back, we take off the front cover plate, and you can see what the cover plate actually does is it retains this bearing and this bearing, so that when you're on and off the throttle, the shaft is not pushing backwards and forwards. It's all held with a circlip to stop it going back, but when you back off, it stops the torque load coming forward and trying to push the bearing out through the front. There's also a dust seal in there, or oil seal I should say. Now this is all basically transferred over, or the gasket's transferred over to our new adapter plate. We'll put a new seal in there, and we'll also have a new spigot bush to suit. The next operation for this one is I need to strip this gearbox down, and the input shaft needs to be turned. We've got a diameter here, I think it's 15 millimeters. It needs to be turned down all the way to the shaft. So we want, instead of having a step in the input shaft, we actually want a parallel shaft all the way there. The excess does get cut off, and that will be determined by which bell housing you use. You only want like a mil or two past the bell housing, but when we get to that stage I'll run through that. Important to note, once you are at this point, you want to get a straight edge, and you need to make sure that you're not touching the case. What will happen if you are, say for example, I'm hard up against the case in that area there, the adapter plate's not going to bolt on square, which is going to cause issues with the bearing. It's going to cause issues with the input shaft. It's effectively going to make your bell housing on a small angle. That's going to do the rear gear bearing in the engine, the front bearing in the gear shaft. Eventually you're going to have issues changing gears. So yeah, it is important to make sure that this surface is at least dead level. Always try and aim for like a millimeter and a half below. That way you're safe. You do have the gasket there, so you can take the thickness of that gasket into account. And once that adapter plate is bolted up flat onto here and you're not touching there, you're right to put your bell housing on and start taking in your clutch measurements, whether you want to run the original Mazda fork and bearing and slave cylinder assembly, which you can use, or use this as a time to switch over to an internal concentric bearing for the clutch operation. Okay, so now we know that the adapter plate fits, it clears. We have a nice small gap all the way around. We know that that is now sealing on the case. We can pull that back off, and I'll strip this box down. Now what we need to do next is this input shaft. That step needs to be gone. What I'll do is I'll pull the box apart, and with the input shaft is we'll machine that all the way down until the start of this blind area. That'll mean that we can just use the standard Nissan spigot in the back of the Mazda crank, albeit we've got to turn half a mil off the OD so that it does fit into the Mazda crank. But yeah, it'll just make it very simple. There's no offset adapters or anything for clutch bearings. We're not spacing the box back extra to try and keep that in the back of the crank. We'll end up cutting about 15 mil off that, but we'll get to that when I've got this turned down. I'll get the box back together and yeah, carry on. Okay, so the input shaft's been machined down and the gearbox has been put back together. Like I said, basically we just needed that down to the diameter all the way to the spline. Then what also gets supplied with the kit is a new spigot bearing. So you'll have to pull the Mazda needle roller bearing out of the back of the crank and install this. Now this doesn't need to be greased or Loctited for the installation. What we recommend for these is just to put this in the freezer for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It'll shrink enough that you'll be able to give it a tap. It'll go straight into the back of the crank. It'll then heat up to room temperature, whatever the temperature of the engine is, and that'll be in position. They are a shrink fit. Then we will say grease the shaft before you install the gearbox. Now getting back to that, so what we'll do next is we'll put the adapter plate back on there with the gasket. Now if you've got an earlier model gearbox, it'll have a paper gasket. If you've got a later one like this, the Cd009, it'll have a metal gasket. The metal gaskets are designed for a one-use only, so on those ones in particular, even though it's brand new, I will recommend just put a little bit of silicone around there. And when you install the adapter plate, these 4 bottom holes need to have thread sealant or silicone on the actual thread of the bolt. These holes here all go into where oil is sitting in the bottom of the trans. So you'll find out the hard way if you don't. You'll have an oil leak and you'll be pulling the whole thing back out and apart again to seal that up. So I'll get this back on, then I'll put the an FC bell housing on it, and I'll show you how we mark it and cut it. And that's pretty straightforward, and that is essentially this one done. Okay, so now that's all back together. For the cutting of the input shaft, now this one is just our dummy bell housing. It's FC bell housing. To get the correct length to cut to, set the bell housing on the adapter plate, a straight edge across there, and we put a mark at that edge there. Now that gets us level with the bell housing, it gets the input shaft enough into the crank. This measurement's not super critical. Realistically, we could cut it there. It's only if we try to put this through now, that will actually bottom out in the back of the crank and cause some issues in the engine. We just want to make sure that it's got some free float. So that's it, we've cut the shaft down. Just a small radius on the edge there, just take the sharp spot off it. We're like a couple of mil over. That's plenty for the input shaft to locate on the spigot, the back of the crank. Now when it comes to the starter motor, you'll notice casting here, they vary just a little bit. This one here actually has a gap, there's clearance there. However, that little lug there generally wants to hit the back of the starter motor. So you'll go around with a flap disc, you'll just take that edge off there. Sometimes you've got to take a small edge just out of here. On the Z32s, it's a much larger cut in the outer case. There's an inner and an outer. So the Z32s need a much larger cut out here to clear the starter motor. So that is pretty much it. So we'll put a shifter on this one. This one's going into I think it was a Series 3 RX-7. So we'll put a shifter in here. It's getting the S1 sequential shifter on this one. But as far as the adapter plate goes, that's it. That's how they go on. Hopefully this is a little bit informative and answers some questions you might have. Anybody who needs one, just send us an email, Matt, Mr. Enforcer @gmail.com, and we'll get one out to you. Now these are designed so that you can run either a hydraulic throwout bearing or you can run the original Mazda fork. Now that decision is up to you and will be determined by how much room you have in the engine bay. In a car with say a 3-rotor or a 4-rotor and you've pushed the engine right back, you're not going to have room for a fork to be moving in here with the slave cylinder against the firewall. In that instance, we'll go for a concentric bearing in there to operate the clutch. Anything else we generally stick to the Mazda fork, bearing, pivot ball, clutch, slave cylinder, keeps all the hydraulics very simple. It's been around for what, 40, 50 years. It just works. Okay, so that's the little bit of an instructional video on how to fit the adapter plate to the Cd009 gearbox. Anyone who's thinking about doing it, hopefully that gives you a bit more insight. Really is something that you can do at home. It's quite a cost-effective way to get a Cd009 gearbox in your car. One thing also to mention is with that adapter plate, it's all designed so that you do keep all your original Mazda clutch flywheel assembly. There's no special flywheel, there's no special clutch plate. The only thing that needs to be changed is the actual hub in the clutch plate itself. Instead of having a Mazda spline in the plate, it'll have the Nissan spline. Keep your Mazda pressure plate, keep your Mazda hydraulics, keep your Mazda flywheel, or be it a steel flywheel. I highly doubt anybody who's putting a Cd009 in their car is going to be running a Mazda cast iron flywheel. But yeah, so it's all pretty self-explanatory, I think. We've made it as dumb-proof as possible. The only thing I can see that the average Joe can't do themselves at home would probably be turn the input shaft down, but that's as simple as just dropping the trans down at a gearbox place, or if you've got enough smarts about yourself, pull the gearbox down, drop the input shaft down to a machine shop, engineering shop, and they can turn that down for you. Quite simple. So yeah, that is it. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, do all that kind of shit, and I'll see you on the next one.